What's up? Guys, good to see you. I'm coming back. So I always explain this to people when I'm speaking somewhere for the first time, that these are legit glasses, they're prescription. I can see close, but not far. So right now you're all blurry, which is how I prefer it. All right. It's kind of a weird day because planned this maybe 2-3 months ago that I'd be here, not realizing this was going to be Pastor Jared's last Sunday. And so I just want to say this to Jared, to Jessica, to their family. Thank you. Many of you will not know this, but Jared came in at a time of transition and difficulty, and had to navigate some fairly difficult things, and has done a great job shepherding this church, caring for you as individuals. And so make sure before you're out of here today that you give him, Jessica, and the family a hug and high fives and just thank them. Yeah. I'm not confident I'm speaking to first service again here, but I am coming back to second service. The energy, I like it. So last Sunday, Pastor Lance kicked off a 2-week teaching series, so just pretty brief, called Happily Even After, and it's a series for married people. I'll just be very candid on that, because what we want to convey is this hopeful message that it's possible to be happy even after the I do's, and even after the in-laws, and even after kids and job transitions and all the craziness. It's possible to be happy. Happiness is not the goal of marriage, but we certainly want to be happy. And if we have a healthy and secure relationship, there's no doubt that happiness will surface at some point. Now, we are going to get into the scriptures today. We're going to look at some of the writings from the Apostle Paul, from King Solomon. But before we do that, I'm going to take a little bit of time to set up where I want to go. And I'm going to ask a very candid question. How many of you, straightforward, I don't know the right word to ask, to say it is, but it's a question of just like direct. How many of you, like me, grew up in the 80s? You grew up in the 80s. Wow. Guys, it was awesome and awful at the same time, wasn't it? Now, everybody cares about their generation when they grew up. We have a fondness toward it. But the 80s were all about side ponytails and jelly bracelets and pop collars and fanny packs. I actually have a picture, several pictures of myself from that age, and you just see the bright colors, right? That's what defines it, plus the oversized shirts. And in the 80s, we just had some cool things. I'm going to jump off the stage for a second. In the 80s, how many of you remember lunch boxes that look like this? Yeah. These lunch boxes were not just lunch boxes, they were weapons. Right? Someone's messing with you, you can just hit them with it. And dude, let me show you what my son has for a lunchbox. Right here. This is his lunchbox. It's like, what are you going to do with that, right? But these lunchboxes had thermoses inside that mom would put either too much Kool-Aid with sugar, the Kool-Aid with too much sugar in it, or chicken noodle soup. It's kind of 50-50 of what she'd put in, right? But that was a big thing of the 80s, and there were great movies. Back to the Future, E.T., The Empire Strikes Back. You remember these? Ghostbusters, Karate Kid, Wax on, wax off. I mean, those were defining words. Every kid just, they just stood there. Then amazing artists. We had Michael Jackson and Madonna and U2 and Bryan Adams and Bon Jovi, right? She says we got to hold on to what we got because it doesn't make a difference if we make it or not. We've got it. We got each other. And that's a lot for love, right? We'll give it a shot. Oh, wow, some karaoke. I was hoping someone would sing. I'm not singing my lines, right? I'm just going to say them. But we're halfway there. We're living on a prayer. Video game systems were a big deal. Atari had come out, and I know video game systems were starting in the 70s, but the 80s, man, this was popular. And today's video game systems have like 15 to 20 buttons or combination of buttons. One. A red button, right? And then Nintendo came out. And when Nintendo came out, it revolutionized things because now we've got several buttons. And when your game stopped working, what did you do? You blow on it. This was so common that Nintendo actually had to come out with a statement that said, you do not need to blow on our games for them to work. And it's like, no, you're lying, Nintendo. We know you really, really do, right? And then when it comes to love and confessing your love, you didn't send a text with an emoji. You would write an actual letter and fold it up as small as possible and be like this little dovetail, holding out, and boom, you pull on it, and like 7 pages come out, and you're reading it, and you're, oh, this is awesome, they love me. And then we also had mixtapes. Mixtapes were like playlists, but they're on a cassette tape, all right? And so this is what you would do. You'd have a dual cassette player, right? You'd either just you'd wait for the right time on the radio when they play your song, or you'd put a cassette tape of a song that you wanted on your mixtape. You'd put your blank tape over here. You'd press record at the exact same time. You'd get done with that song, then you press stop on everything. You'd put your next tape in with the next song. It was crazy. And I kid you not, last week I came across a mixtape that I made for my wife. And I actually started the tape by talking to her. And I was like, Randy, this is just a tape of me talking to you. I did not play this in first service, but I decided I'm going to play you the first 20 seconds of this tape. Here we go. Get ready. Clap. I kid you not. I had a girl, she's like 17 years old. She approached me after service in Redmond last week where I did play this, and she said, can I listen to that whole tape? I was like, get out of here. I said, I'm not going to play that whole tape for you, right? But nobody does this anymore. Why? Because technology's advanced. And as our world advances, our world changes. Here's what happens. We change. We don't even realize it because it happens slowly, but we're changing. So in a couple of months, I'll have been married for 29 years. 29 years. And I was not wearing a floral suit. That's the bouquet, right? Which we could have sold those flowers, taken the money, give it to the poor. We could have probably fed a village for a month with these things. But 29 years, and you know this, you've been married for a decade or longer. Man, you've changed as individuals because of life's transitions. So I just wrote down a couple of things that have changed in my marriage over almost 29 years. Our hairstyles have changed. We both put on a little bit of weight. We've lived in 15 different homes in 6 different states. We've had 2 biological daughters. We adopted a son back in 2006 who was much easier to raise than those with my DNA. I've been on staff at 7 different churches, gone through significant loss, lost my brother Rick in Iraq back in 2008. My wife has lost both of her parents. And we don't realize it when it's happening, but all of those things that happen to us in life, whether they're dramatic or not dramatic, they're changing us. To eventually what happens is we become different people. Our beliefs are changing. Right? If you're like, no, I believe the very same things I believed 30 years ago about everything, it's like, well, you're not maturing then. Because our beliefs change, our worldview changes, our attitudes change, and especially if something dramatic happens to us, our personality can even change. Some people say, well, personalities don't really change, temperaments don't change. But man, something dramatic enough, those things can certainly change, and they definitely evolve. And this is the reason why I'm officiating ceremonies, wedding ceremonies, as a couple is ready to express their love through vows. I always say, let's be clear, the vows you're about to make are not just to this individual that you love deeply with all of your heart. You are committing not just to love them, but to love every version of them they become. And if you're married for a couple decades, it's likely you'll be married to 7 or 8 different spouses. Right? You're like, I don't even know who you are. And even in my own marriage, right? When we started having kids, my wife ran a daycare out of our house. She loved doing it. She said, I'm going to do this forever. 10 years into it, she's like, I'm out, right? And now she does in-home care for older adults. There was a season in our marriage where we lived close to both of our parents. So holidays were easy. We'd go to her parents and we'd go over to mine. Well, then we moved several states away, and the dynamics of that shifted. As we had young kids in the house, we couldn't go on vacations by just ourselves. We couldn't just go on date nights whenever we wanted. But now they're older, thank you, Jesus. And we can go whenever we want, right? So the transitions that happen to us are very slow for the most part, that we don't even see them happen. And then other days you're like, dude, that was a quick transition, right? Sometimes my wife will be in the kitchen and she'll walk by and I'll give her a little love tap. She'll be like, ooh, I like that. And a couple days later, I'll do the same thing, give her a little love tap. She's like, get away from me, you pervert. You know, what is wrong with you? And it's like, okay, transition happened quickly. But here's what I think is important for us to understand, that as humans, we're constantly changing and evolving, which is why learning to love our spouse is a lifelong journey. Learning to love our spouse is a lifelong journey. It's a lifelong journey because we're changing and they're changing. But the key phrase here is learning to love. Love is something we learn. From the moment we're born on this planet, we're learning. We're learning it from our parents and the adults in our life, how to interact, what communication looks like, what affection looks like, and it's for the good or bad. Right? We learn about love early on from fairy tales, from cartoons. We learn about it as we get older. Some people read the romance novels. Other people, it's through songs or social media or movies or TV shows. And no matter what era we're talking about, no matter what time period in history we're talking about, our concept of love is modeled by our environment. So 2,000 years ago, there's people living in the ancient city of Corinth who they're learning about love through ancient Greek culture. Now, ancient Corinth, just like today, right? It's a port city, and so people would go to the city for arts and entertainment. In many ways, it really was like Seattle with a lot less rain. But it's this ancient city. The temple of Aphrodite was there, which this temple overlooked the city. Aphrodite was the Greek goddess of love and was associated with beauty and fertility and sexual attraction. And so the city of Corinth was known for sexual indulgence. Now, our culture is very sexualized. We know this. It's sexualized, and we talk about, ancient Corinth, our culture on steroids. There was a high demand for prostitution in brothels because you've got traders and sailors and tourists coming to the city. And as they looked up prostitutes were individuals who, for the most part, had been forced into it. This was an acceptable part of their culture, the sex trade. Well, the Apostle Paul decides to start the very first church in the city of Corinth. Now, you can imagine, he starts this church, and the people who had grown up in Corinth, as they come into the church, they're coming in to the church with sexual hurts and regrets and baggage and faulty thinking. And so a few years after he starts this church, what Paul does is he actually writes a letter correcting some bad theology, teaching some new things, and he has several different topics he addresses, but one of the topics that Paul addresses in a very clear way and confronts is their attitude towards sex and pleasure and prostitution. And he actually asks this question. He says, don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price, so you must honor God with your body. Now, people living in ancient Corinth think the same way we do today. Like, well, that's not where God dwells. God dwells in temples. And he dwells in cathedrals and in these holy places. Those are the things that are sacred. And Paul says, no. You need to reframe your thinking. You, as a human being, are sacred. God dwells in you. What does that mean practically? It means that everywhere you go, since the Spirit of God dwells in you, if you're a follower of Jesus, you need to be reflecting God, and that includes in the way you love others. And we need to be reminded of this because we're constantly being brainwashed to believe that love's transactional. And it's about pleasure and personal gain, and it's about what you can get from someone rather than what you can give. So right now, The Bachelor is in its 29th season. And I would ask, how many of you have never seen The Bachelor, but I don't want anybody lying this morning. And so here's the deal. It is a reality show. We were familiar enough with it, even if you've never seen it. You just know there's this dude. He's surrounded by 20, 25, sometimes 30 beautiful women in this paradise setting. There's swimming pools and hot tubs, and they get in helicopters for dates, and they fly to some glacier, and U2 is there, giving them a private concert, right? And there's all these different emotions that are being expressed, and the bottom line, I could fall in love with my sister in that environment, right? It just really, why? Because for 10 weeks, producers worked to create an environment that manipulated emotions and caused everyone to think about themselves and what they could get. We are inundated with distorted and very flawed expressions of love. And it's possible that's your personal story. Because when you looked at the adults in your life, you looked at the marriages in your life, some maybe your parents, it always felt like love is something that's distant and conditional and painful. Feels like relationships are filled with conflict and betrayal and disconnect. Or maybe as you started dating, love was expressed through lust and through self-indulgence and out-of-control desires. And it's important for you to hear this, that if that has been your past, or maybe it's even your present, that does not have to be your future. By God's grace, your future can look different than the past. A few times a year, I like to talk about my father. And it's because of his specific story. He grew up in a family with 11 kids. His mom loved Jesus, and his dad was not a follower of Jesus, was a decent guy except for when he would drink. The problem is he drank a lot. So he was toxic, he was abusive, he did some really very harmful things to the family. Kids ended up being put into foster care system. It just not a good upbringing. Well, then in his early 20s, he gets married. And he's bringing all these emotions, the resentment and the hurt and the pain into the marriage. And then he starts having kids. And he starts to see evidence of the behavior he hated in his father. He sees it in himself. And so my dad made the decision. He said, I want to change the course of my family tree. I just don't know how to do that. I don't know how to change it. By God's grace, he was surrounded with people who said, you need to give God a try. You know how it is. Get religion, get faith. And so he started showing up to an environment like this that he was totally unfamiliar with. This wasn't his jam. This wasn't what he normally would do. But he showed up to environments like this, would take notes and would try to listen. And he didn't understand a lot of it. But he kept showing up. And eventually he felt he understood enough to surrender his life to Jesus. That's when I was young. And so for all of my growing up years, I didn't see a toxic or abusive father. I saw a dad who tried to love my mom like Christ loved him. He wasn't perfect, but I also saw a mother who tried to love my dad like Christ loved her. And it was like this mutual love that they were just trying to evidence the love. This is what I grew up with. And I tell you this because you can change the course of your family tree by God's grace. And the thing about love, I know we want the emotions, we want the attraction. That stuff's, it's actually great to have in a relationship. You don't want to be in a relationship. You're like, I'm not attracted. I don't love you. I don't feel love towards you. I understand. That's difficult. But at the end of the day, love is so much more. So I've officiated more than 100 wedding ceremonies over the almost 30 years of being a pastor. And one of the questions I've started to ask in a lot of wedding ceremonies is, how many of you have been married for 20 years or longer? So we're going to do this right now. This is always dangerous, but let's go. 20 years or longer, you've been married. All right. Now, for those of you who you raise your hand, I'm going to ask you another question. And don't worry if you talk over yourself. I want to ask, when you think of love, if you could describe love in one word or maybe two words, what words come to your mind? So some people might say patience or kindness. What would you say? Communicating, healthy, forgiveness, caring, kindness. What was that? Crazy. There's always someone. Crazy, intimacy. Well, yeah, let's start throwing out of the word. Okay, so here's what if we did this for the next hour and we really thought about it, everybody who would shout out words would say words that are actually choices, not emotions. Right? These words, kindness, patience, these things are not emotions. They're choices. Now, certainly there may be some words that we could throw in that are emotions, but most of them, and to the core of our being, we know this. We've heard this said before. Come on. Love is a choice. We know this, but we have to be reminded of it because we will leave a setting like this and we'll be inundated with ads and marketing and TV shows and movies that make it seem like it's supposed to be emotion. But this is what Paul did. And I don't even like to write or read these words that Paul wrote to the church in Corinth because they become white noise to us. If you've been to weddings, if you've been in saints like this, you've heard these words so many times, but we're going to go through them anyways. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It's not irritable and it keeps no record of being wronged. He says it does not rejoice about injustice, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. Now, again, we hear these words, we're like, yay, I agree with you, Paul. These are, for the most part, choices, not emotions. So let's go back to the start of that verse. What I want to do just for a moment here is I just want to slow down a little bit and look at these words because we need to be reminded it's not just sensual and exciting and effortless and attractional all the time. There's more to this. He says love is patient. It's not reactionary. It doesn't need instant gratification. Love accepts the fact that our spouse is human. And even though we want them to become a certain type of person overnight, patience says, I'm going to let you go on your own journey just like God allows me to go on my own journey. And I'm going to be praying for you and encouraging you into your, it's patient, it's kind. Kindness is respect and compassion and understanding. What kindness does is it say, I'm going to elevate the needs of the other person. Now, that doesn't mean you're taking advantage of. Sometimes elevating their needs, say what they need is some boundaries right now. But that love is kind. It's not jealous. It celebrates the success of the other person. It's not resentful. It's not boastful. Why? Because a boastful person is full of themselves. They're always going to magnify how hard they work and all the things they do, and then they're going to minimize what their spouse does. Love is not proud, because proud needs the spotlight all the time. A proud person inevitably feels superior to their spouse. Love is not rude. It's not disrespectful. It's not offensive. It thinks before it speaks. It does not demand its own way. It's not preoccupied with self. It doesn't elevate my needs and my desires over the desires and needs of my spouse. It's not irritable. It doesn't have a short fuse. Right? Irritability is a launching pad for anger, but what love is love is tempered. Love rejoices whenever the truth wins out. It's full of integrity. Doesn't have lies, doesn't have secrets. You think about that, right? If you've got significant secrets that you're hiding from your spouse, lies that you're hiding, right, that you've told your spouse, if that's happening, it's impossible for them to love you. They can love the version of you they know, but they don't know the real you because you've decided to hide things from them. Love never gives up. It's persistent. It apologizes. It forgives when it's been wronged. It initiates reconciliation. It just wants to keep moving forward, right? Love never loses faith. It says, I believe the best in the other person. I give the benefit of the doubt. It's always hopeful. What does that mean? It's not gullible, but it's very optimistic. It says, I'm going to choose to believe the best about my spouse. Love endures through every circumstance. It's resilient. It's determined. Now, here's the deal. Even if you're not married, this stuff works. It works in friendships. It works with family members. Right? When we choose love, it makes a difference. And the kind of love that Paul's describing is not middle school, high school love. The kind of love that Paul's walking through here is an adult type of love. And if you're like, man, I do feel like I've got this erotic love with my spouse, man, I've got all these feelings, this is only going to enhance it. Now, I'm cognizant, it doesn't mean every relationship works out happily ever after. Right? It takes two people to fall in love and get married, but only one to say, I want to separate or divorce. And sometimes, even the person who doesn't say that, their behavior has demanded that. So Paul says, man, you need to put down roots in your relationship. So remember this windstorm a few months ago, back in November, and knocked down lots of different things? Well, there was a fence that runs by my house that had fallen down, right? It's parts of it. And what's interesting is the trees around it, for the most part, there was one or two that had fallen over, but the fence, why? Because it's not rooted the same way. It's the little things that can easily get pushed over. It's it's a tree that doesn't have significant roots that can get pushed over away, or a tree that's even dead. Well, that's what we all want. Well, Paul says you can have we want the rooted, right, and not the fence. He says you can have that, but you have to choose love. And it's hard to choose love when your emotions aren't there. The good news is, if we choose love when the emotions aren't there, often the emotions will follow. Now, if I said, how many of you want that kind of love? All of our hands would go up. Oh, yeah, I want that kind of love. I want it in my friendships. I want it in my family. I want it in my marriage. Then why is it so hard? I'll tell you why. Because of pride. Pride makes it difficult to choose love. That's the bottom line. What pride does is it takes my hopes, dreams, and desires and turns them into demands. Pride causes me to feel entitled. Pride magnifies the weaknesses of my spouse. Pride keeps score because it has to win. Pride rarely asks for help. Why? Because it doesn't want to listen. It doesn't even see that they've done wrong. Pride is what keeps us arguing our point long after we realize we don't even have a good point. Pride causes us to close up when we should be opening up. And 3,000 years ago, King Solomon talks about the results of pride. He says, pride goes before destruction and haughtiness before a fall. Doesn't matter what kind of relationship we're talking about, you go down the path long enough, right? There's going to be disaster, ruin, and chaos. It's just going to happen. You have too much pride with your employer, you're not going to have a job before long. You have too much pride in a friendship, guess what? That friendship's going to come to an end. And in marriage, it's the same thing. Another thing that Solomon writes about pride is he says it leads to conflict. Why? Because conflict is rooted in pride. It blinds me to the thoughts, opinions, perspective, pain, feelings, and needs of the other person. I'm just blinded to it. And conflict is inevitable in marriage, right? Dr. John Gottman, he has an institute here, and he's seen as a relationship expert. He's written several books on marriages. He talks about studies that have been done, and Gottman says this. He says 70% of the conflicts in our marriage are never going to go away. That's encouraging, right? He said they're never going away. He says, here's why. They're actually tensions that, if they can be managed, don't need to turn into conflicts. Tensions. What does that mean? It means just based on your personality and who you are, right? One of you is a morning person, the other's a night owl. One of you is always wanting to be early, the other just fashionably late. One of you likes to spend money, the other's a tightwad. One of you is an extrovert, the other is an introvert. One of you likes watching romantic comedies, the other likes good movies. And you have these tensions. You have these tensions that should stay tensions. Why do they turn into conflict? Because of our pride? Because we have to have our own way. And with pride, it's easy to justify. This is my personality. This is who I am. I'd apologize if I think I'm wrong. Pride destroys relationships. But that doesn't mean we can't have healthy and secure relationships. It just means that we have to confront pride. And I don't like using words like the secret to or this, but I do think the secret to a happy marriage is humility. And I say secret because we don't hear a ton of talks about this. You can go to seminars, you can go to read books, you could go to conferences, right? All that stuff. And it's said without actually saying it, but you want to get to the heart of what's going to create a happy marriage? It's when two people choose the path of humility, because humility is a posture of the heart. It's saying, I know I don't know everything. I don't have to have my way all the time. I'm willing to listen more than I talk. There's a British author and theologian named C.S. Lewis who describes humility this way. He says, it's not thinking less of yourself, it's just thinking of yourself less. Right? Marriage tends to be conflict because it's this tug of war. She has to win and I have to win, and we're going back and forth on this. And most marriages have someone with a more agreeable personality. And when that's the case, usually what happens is that same person every time just drops their end of the rope. They say, I don't have to win, you can win. And then the person who doesn't have the agreeable part, now this might surprise you, that would be me in this relationship. Right? In my marriage, I'm not the one who's the most agreeable. My wife is just always whatever. And I'm like, gotta win. So let me talk candidly to those of you who have my personality. A lot of times I don't let go because, again, I'll say, I would apologize if I thought I did anything wrong. Right? Because pride blinds us to the things we do wrong. And then I feel like if I drop my end of the rope, it's kind of apathy, like I don't care. The problem is I care about almost everything. I'm just passionate. So people with my personality, what we have to learn is we can win the fight. We can win the argument. We can win it. But how do you win when you're a team? Right? Because you win, but you really lose because when you're on the same team, it's impossible for just one person to win. And so I have had to learn over the course of my marriage, it's okay for me to let go of my end of the rope. Humility says I don't have to be right all the time. I don't have to keep score. I can treat my wife with respect. I can apologize more. I can listen more. If I'm hurt, I can forgive quickly. I don't have to be demanding. Apostle Paul writes this in one of his first century letters. He says, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, this is key, thinking of others as better than yourselves. He doesn't say they are better. He says just think of them as better. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others too. Now imagine if we did this in marriage. I'm going to treat them and think of them as better than myself. I know we're equal in God's sight. We know how to do this. We've been at work parties where the boss is there. You talk to the boss differently than you talk to everybody else. We've been at events where there's a celebrity there, and well, before God, we're all equal, but I'm hoping to meet that person. And when I meet them, I'm going to be very careful what I'm saying to them. Right? We've been there where we walked into a hospital room and the mom had just given birth to a baby, and we walk in. We're not the most important person at that moment. Right? It's the mom and this new baby. We don't walk in and say, dude, I'm so glad to see you because I got to unload all my problems I've been going through this week. Right? You know better than that. At a wedding, we know who the most important person is, and it's never the groom, right? The groom walks down and is like, that guy, I don't even know what she was thinking with him. But she walks down, and everybody stands, and it's like this thing of honor. A couple weeks ago, I was down in the LA area, and I've built it's the most unique friendship I have. I built this friendship with a talent agent, and all he does is manage A-list celebrities. All right, it's just a very, and I don't have many of these, otherwise I'd be name dropping, right? But just a very interesting relationship. And so I texted him and said, hey, I'm in town, you want to grab dinner? And my wife was with me, and he said, let's do it. I said, where do you want to go? And so he picked out. Then we meet him there. We walk in, and then he says, hey, where do you want to sit? I said, bro, you pick. Where you sit? So then we sit down. We sit down. You know what I do with my phone? I put it away. I wasn't sitting there texting the whole time. I put it away. He told stories that would make you not like certain celebrities. And I'm like, tell me more. Right? He told some jokes that some of them weren't even that funny. I was laughing at stuff, right? It was showing respect. Here's why. We know how to treat someone as though they're more valuable than us. We know how to. We're done. I make sure I'm thanking them. Like, we know how to. But we just don't want to do it because our pride often gets in the way. So, you want to humble yourself? Here's how you do it. We humble ourselves every time we prioritize our spouse. Every time that we say, I'm going to prioritize them, I'm going to be fully present with them, I'm going to talk positive about them, whether they're around or not around, I'm going to pursue them, I'm going to pray for them, I'm going to just find ways to make them feel loved. I'm going to humble myself. And that may be so out of your personality. Right? You might be this person just like, even though I love them, it's just not me. Humility is better than regret. And I have seen an endless list of people who just have so many regrets. And when you get to the root of their issues, it's pride. He never apologizes. She never forgives. Humility is better than regret. And if you're like my dad and you didn't see this modeled in front of you, you can change the course of your family tree. And maybe the starting point for you just be as simple as to at least Google search. You don't even have to read the book. Gary Chapman wrote a book like 30 years ago called 5 Love Languages. And he talks about how as humans we feel and receive love in different ways. And he talks about words of affirmation and building your spouse up. He talks about acts of service. He talks about gift giving. He talks about physical affection and quality time. And he says, our spouse feels love in 1 or 2 unique ways. Well, that's great, but I'm not a words of affirmation person. That's not how I grew up. But my spouse is, and it's just, humility says, I'm going to learn a language. And when we humble ourselves and prioritize our spouse, what happens is we lay a foundation for our relationship in which we can have a secure and healthy relationship. And hopefully, at some point, that leads to happiness. So in another one of his letters, Paul writes this. He says, be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. So imagine if she decides, okay, I'm going to do this, and he decides, I'm going to do this. Imagine what that relationship could look like. I'm going to close with a story that I've only told a handful of times and always in very small group settings where I trusted everybody. I did share it recently with our Redmond campus, and I'll share it with you today, but the reason I've hesitated sharing it is it causes me so much angst inside, and I'm a pretty open book, but so much angst inside. 2017, I was being crushed on every side. I've talked about that here at Timberlake, and I've talked about how the church I was pastoring moved 6 times in a year. We were down hundreds of people, hundreds of thousands in our giving. I thought this thing that I'd given my life to is now just going to have to close its doors. I have a daughter that's suffering from mental health. She was in programs and had not lived with us for a couple years. I have another daughter, she's going through a season of rebellion, and I just felt like I'm losing. And I wasn't able to articulate that because a lot of this is subconscious, right? But I just felt like I couldn't win in any area of life. And there was a Saturday evening where my wife and I just got in a huge fight. Because what would happen is, based on how I was feeling, I didn't connect the dots on this, but I would come home and I would unleash on my wife. I was never physically abusive, but very mean-spirited with my words and very hurtful with my words. So we get in this fight one Saturday night, and she says, I can't do this anymore. Dave, just living with you, you're so demeaning and you're just so hurtful. And so she said, I'm out. And she leaves. And she goes a couple blocks away to the home of our executive pastor and his wife. right? Justin and Lisa Matthews. And she ends up staying the night there. Well, that was a Saturday night. The next day is Sunday morning. So that's church. So I'm standing in the lobby of the church, and out of the corner of my eye, I see Lisa. I'm like, oh, dear God, I was hoping she'd be sick today or something. I don't want to see these people, right? So I see her come in, and I'm talking to people, and I'm like, yes, God bless you. Oh, yeah, good to see you. Oh, yeah, I'll be praying for your marriage. Yes, yes, yes. All those things pastors will say. And I'm just hoping. I'm hoping to avoid her. And I look up, and she's standing right next to me. I'm like, hi, Lisa. And she just goes and gives me this big bear hug, and she whispers in my ear. She says, we love you, and we don't judge you. And then she walked away. There's something that happened in me, man. It just kind of, okay. Well, later that week, her husband says to me, hey, Dave, I want to echo what my wife said. We love you, and we don't judge you. And then he added this. He said, but you need help, and I'm insisting you get help. Because here's the deal, Dave. You've known about these issues for a while. Your pride is keeping you from seeing what's so obvious. You need help. And it was that conversation, along with a conversation from one of my mentors who called me and had a very straightforward talk with me, because my wife called him, and that allowed us to get on this journey of health. And today we've got a very healthy marriage. Don't ask her, just trust me. We've got a great relationship. No, we really do. We really do. But I tell you that story because if you're in a season, maybe you're separated, maybe you wish you were separated, maybe you're just in this very tough spot and you don't see past it. I need you to hear this. We love you and we don't judge you. But it's also possible you might need help. And if you need help, you can email Pastor Jason. You can go to the Timberlake Church website and you can find me, and it'll go to someone who works alongside me, but they'll get that to me, and I'll make sure that we direct you and get you the resources that you need. I'm not a professional counselor, so I don't really do that, but I'm telling you, we are here to love you, to pray over you, and when this service is done today, we'll have people available up front to pray with you, and I know how that goes. Like, well, if someone sees me praying, and maybe it's not even for marriage, they're going to think I have marriage. Don't worry about that. Dude, let's get rid of the judgment stuff. We don't know why people come up to pray, but we want to be a church that prays for people and loves people and cares for people. Let me pray for you. Heavenly Father, I thank you for love, and I thank you for relationships, and I thank you for allowing us to connect with each other, and in some cases, fall in love and get married. But Lord, we need your help. As the temple of God, your Spirit dwelling inside of us, help us to push past the pride that's so easy to surface in our life. Help us to have the courage to humble ourselves and to love our spouse like you love us, so that our relationships can go the distance. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.